black coffee.
This is the Kavoya Coffee Podcasting Network. Coffee people talking to coffee people about coffee and things coffee adjacent. This episode of Extra Shot is brought to you by Kavoya Specialty Coffee, where coffee is always a collaborative voyage. The Life and Times of Robusta. Quote, "The Robusta variety shows a tendency when planted in selected soils to produce larger berries and have an improved flavor." End quote. Tea and Coffee Trade Journal, July 1917. Once upon a time in specialty coffee, Robusta was verboten, the enemy, bad, bad, bad. The attitude against Robusta inside specialty coffee was highly emotional, and for good reason. Robusta had been weaponized by the dominant commercial coffee roasters during price wars that lasted decades, and acclimatized consumers to cheap coffee. As specialty coffee became a self-aware segment of the coffee industry and rallied around its message that coffee can taste significantly better than what you're used to drinking, it struggled with the inherent stage whisper that followed and cost you significantly more money. When the coffee industry entered an extended season of consolidation following the Second World War, the largest of the large national coffee roasters competed against each other for a greater share of the grocery store shelves by lowering prices, and they lowered prices by using less expensive and lower quality green coffee. As a blend component, Robusta fit the bill. This nearly across-the-board decrease in quality among large commercial roasters resulted in a corresponding decrease in coffee consumption in the United States and helped set the stage for the rise of specialty coffee. For specialty coffee roasters, Robusta had become more than a symbol for bad, cheap coffee. It became the personification of bad and cheap, and it wasn't just business, it felt personal. I was once in a meeting with a dozen volunteers working on an industry project together. When one of the roasters casually mentioned that they used Robusta in a blend they marketed as highly caffeinated coffee, another roaster expressed anger and dismay and then left the room and didn't come back. But that was over 20 years ago. If Robusta's reputation hasn't been exactly rehabilitated over the years, at least it's no longer a dirty word. As with its cousin Arabica, not all Robusta is created equal, and quality can vary significantly. Once considered a true commodity with very little differentiation, two kinds, bad Robusta bound to become instant coffee, and less bad Robusta destined for roasted and ground blends, Robusta now appears in a variety of places along the coffee quality continuum. And if we're being honest, this was always the case. However, the word Arabica became ubiquitous in the marketing of specialty coffee, almost synonymous with the word specialty. In retrospect, this is somewhat regrettable because the message created an assumption that all Robusta is bad and all Arabica is good. Both assumptions are not only incorrect, but harmful too. Judging by demand, Robusta clearly has a role to play. According to World Coffee Research, Robusta's share of coffee production globally has gone from 28% in 1991 to 44% in 2021, corresponding with a growth in consumption. If it were not for Robusta, much of it grown in locations where Arabica would not thrive, coffee demand would have simply outpaced coffee supply long ago. Demand would have left supply in the dust, and we probably don't want to know what that looks like. And yet, with climate change, the potential for a world where we grow less coffee than we want to drink is very real. We don't know how long Robusta has been used in one way or another as a food or beverage. Perhaps like Arabica, people were chewing Robusta long before they were brewing Robusta. But we know it wasn't considered for commercial cultivation until very recently in the history of coffee. In All About Coffee, 1922, W.H. Ukers wrote that in 1898, a Belgian botanist came across a species of coffee growing wild in what is today DR Congo. The species was actually known as Caffea laurente until the Belgian horticultural company that was the first to plant this particular species as a commercial crop renamed it Caffea robusta. According to the book Genetic Resources of Caffea, this species was cultivated along the African Atlantic coast and independently discovered by Grant, 1861, in Tanzania. And then, according to World Coffee Research, cultivation of the species began around 1870 in what is now known as the Democratic Republic of Congo. Botanists spent decades sorting out which genetic subset of Robusta would be commercially viable, and by the turn of the century, there were at least 8 types of Robusta being commercially cultivated in Africa alone. The difficulty in nailing down who first planted Robusta for commercial cultivation and when is probably due to there being so many types of Robusta. The different stories could each be associated with different varieties. Nobody discovered and then started growing Robusta commercially. Different people discovered different distinct varieties of Robusta at different times and in different places. Presumably, each genetic group has its own commercial cultivation origin story. See the map in the written version of this blog at the link in the show notes. In any case, Robusta was so closely associated with Congo that some agronomists and botanists referred to it as Coffea Congo in the early days. In the early 20th century, Robusta was planted in Java and Indonesia, then India and the Ivory Coast. Coffee farmers liked Robusta because it was more resistant to pests and disease than Arabica, produced more coffee than Arabica, and could be grown under a wider variety of circumstances, including low altitude. Robusta also tends to produce coffee sooner after planting, as early as 2 years after planting, when Arabica can take 4 years. Ambivalence towards Robusta seemingly goes way back. Euchers writes that imports of Robusta into the United States were not insignificant in the early days of the 20th century, but fell off after 1912, when the New York Coffee and Sugar Exchange began prohibiting Robusta deliveries on the exchange contracts after March 1st, 1912. The exchange contract used at the time actually mentions within the contract itself that Robusta is excluded. According to author Mark Pendergrast in his book On Common Grounds, the New York Coffee and Sugar Exchange prohibition on Robusta coffee deliveries was motivated by a desire to protect the exchange's reputation and the integrity of its market. To add insult to injury, in 1921, the United States Bureau of Chemistry, precursor to the FDA, ruled that Coffea Robusta could not be sold as Java coffee, or under any form of labeling which tended either directly or indirectly to create the impression that it was Coffea Arabica, so long and favorably known as Java coffee. Euchers adds that this was in line with the Department of Agriculture's previous definition that coffee was the seed of Coffea Arabica or Coffea liberica, and that Java coffee was Coffea Arabica from Java. Robusta was first planted on Java in 1902, and after just 16 years, Robusta was 85% of the coffee growing on Java because rust disease had destroyed most of the Arabica growing under 3,000 feet. Eventually, in 1931, the New York Coffee and Sugar Exchange allowed Robusta trading due to improvements in quality and the steady increase in production of soluble coffees. With the success of Nescafé, first introduced in 1938, Robusta became a player. Instant coffee would remain the primary use for Robusta in the United States until the 50s. Between 1950 and 1953, green coffee prices increased nearly 100%, and large roasters began to use more Robusta in their blends, a trend that would continue. By the early 1970s, consumption of instant coffee and regular coffee were almost neck and neck, presumably because they tasted almost the same. But as it always seems to do, coffee survived. In part, this was due to Americans shifting from percolators to drip brewers, thank you Joe DiMaggio, so coffee tasted better. The emergence of the specialty coffee sector also helped to stop the decline in consumption, and over time influenced even fast food and convenience stores to make incremental improvements in quality. Today, coffee is under threat due to climate change, and we face the very real possibility of a world where coffee supply falls far short of demand. It's time for Robusta to be reconsidered, especially in the U.S., and no longer subject to prior constraint. It was probably always nonsensical to assume all Robusta was the same. It's time to assume instead that the right Robusta at the right time and in the right place is the right move. You've been listening to an Extra Shot audio blog written, read, and produced by me, Mike Ferguson. Our theme music for this episode is K-Town from DRC Music, Kinshasa 1-2. You can find a link to the original written blog in the show notes. If you've enjoyed this or any podcast on the Kavoya Coffee Podcasting Network, please do all the things. Rate, review, follow, or subscribe, and tell 3 friends. Right now. I'll wait. You'll find a link to our listener survey in the show notes. Please take the survey.
Please, I'm begging you.
And remember 2 things. You can email me at mike.ferguson@kavoya.com, and Black Coffee is performed by the one and only Ella Fitzgerald.